Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Current Openings. What the world doesn't quite get yet. A conversation where David Price Francis and I dive in the current of this moment to discover what is opening. David, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. Good to be with you again.
Well, so I have called you in short notice to help me in my grapple with what appears to be an 800-pound gorilla. It's just that that gorilla is actually not at all against us, it's for us, and it's trying to dance with us, and I'm hoping you can help me in this unfolding discovery.
Well, can I put something with that right as we start?
Please.
I've been studying the idea of thesis and antithesis, and the more important something is you're going at, the bigger the antithesis you're going to meet. So if you've been meeting an 800-pound gorilla, that says that you must be after something very worthwhile, otherwise you'd only meet a 5-pound gorilla.
Beautiful, and you are like 7 steps ahead in the conversation. I haven't yet even shared the 3 working titles, and you bring us into one expression of the unification of 3 through thesis, antithesis, and the capacity to synthesize both into something that unlocks possibilities. So let me bring this slide and begin to thread our way through this. I'm proposing 3 working titles because we don't exactly know how this will unfold. So I'm calling this the knowledge authentication process, creational logic, and a Trinitarian universe. So just a few days ago, I recorded with Kira Kinikandru and Karen Heaney, Universalis 17 and 18. And we called it the verification problem. And the challenge we grappled with there is what I hope to get your help. So rather than rethread through the same territory in the way we have developed it on the Universalis episode 18, this current openings 22, which does represent completion of 21 and entering a whole new space, is an effort to truly open this conundrum, the authentication conundrum, the verification conundrum, sometimes called the justification conundrum. It's everything to do with how we acquire, assimilate, and verify knowledge. And what I want to do at the opening is walk us through 2 pathways that present this challenge. One is a mesoteric challenge, looked at through the mesoteric perspective of knowledge. Another is the esoteric entry into the conversation, because we have in the last several episodes traveled again to where we began, the first current openings we called esoteric truth. And we have along the journey time and again visited the premise of esoteric, looking at the world through esoteric lens. And in the last 2 episodes in current openings, episode 20, we looked at the epoch mystery. And we asserted and made some esoteric claims. And we continue to develop on that in current openings, episode 21, where we looked at the conductivity mystery. So that would be the esoteric framing of those conundrums. Essentially, people are asking, well, how is this knowledge sourced, and how can it be verified, and what might I discover if I embrace this inquiry, and how can I know what to expect by embarking on this journey? So I just framed what I intended to do as the second framing. But let me just pause here and see Again, you have no idea where I'm leading because that's part of the agreement. I do some prep work, and you say, I'm going to show up, and whatever you throw at me, I'm going to play badminton with, which is a unique capacity that you have developed. What comes up for you as I just make these early framings into today?
Yes, and we enjoy ourselves in the process. The first thing is current opening's 22. It's catch 22, but can we catch it?
Right.
So there's something to catch, and can we catch it? So it's another name I was thinking for esoteric knowledge is revelatory knowledge. So how can we then verify? It's like the story of Tesla that we told in the knowledge predicament, where something came in and he'd been working for a long time about the idea of electricity, electrical current, and then he's out walking in the park and he pauses and there's a particular angle of the sunlight and he has a stick and he draws four chambers in the dirt on the floor and he knows that he's got it. And how did he verify it? He actually then constructed it and it worked. So I thought that's revelatory knowledge because it's new. It's new to him. It's new to the human race. And then how do we verify it? Which we'll be getting into that journey today. So that comes to mind. And then the importance of the mesoteric knowledge in terms of mostly building on what's already been discovered, but building upon it. And the exoteric, which is working within the bounds of what's already been discovered. I even thought with it, possibly with the exoteric, it's like the known. The mesoteric is adding something extra, so it's going into the unknown, but on a known base. So it's the known unknown. And then the esoteric kind of seeking to get into the genuinely unknown, as it's been called. And I've wondered about that as a three-part system. We'll discover more about it today, I'm sure, as we go on. But I'm not fully, it's good, I'm not fully formed on this. So it's information and forming as we go.
That's very astute, and you kind of gave away the entire episode, but not quite. Not quite. So here we go.
Okay.
I am proposing we call this the validation and verification problem.
Right, okay.
So the way I enter the first conundrum that we are going to address is by proposing that in the ancient world, before the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the threefold search for truth and for knowledge of science, religion, and philosophy was an integrated endeavor. They worked together. These three natures of inquiry were not separated. They were really joined as one unified endeavor. And with the rise of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and with the search for objective knowledge that truly gave rise to the scientific inquiry, it catalyzed a third-person perspectival initiation, which I'm proposing is a seeding of the universalis human capacity. The third-person perspectival kind of entry is the idea of objective truth. It's not what I see versus what you see. It's not even I see the eyes with which you see me. It's more what it is that an objective bystander looking at something is seeing, and can that be tested that dozen different people, as they observe, they will come up with the same findings, the same measures, the same outcomes, which leads later to the idea of even more than a third-person perspective. And so what the scientific method in a nutshell came to do was to enable us to go through these steps, to observe and discover a phenomenon, to then ask a question about that phenomenon, to then research possible answers, to then formulate some kind of a prediction or hypothesis about the answer that were suggested, to then perform, number 5, an experiment to test those assumptions, to thereby analyze the data and validate, with which to be able, number 7, to reject or update the theory, draw a conclusion, and apply the finding. So the power of this way of thinking, the power of this way of navigating life has been so extraordinary. And we can easily say that the success of the scientific project is visible and experienced in everything that's around us, the extraordinary discoveries, the extraordinary knowledge, the extraordinary, I'm missing a can, so it's a can-do know-how that have made the modern world possible. That's what happens when you work late at night on these things. And so far so good, very exciting. But I am bringing to the table the realization that, first of all, there is a shadow in this, which is through the scientific inquiry, we have learned to exteriorize truth, to exteriorize inquiry, to exteriorize knowledge, and we've privileged the telescope and the microscope, and we've given those tremendously greater significance than our own interior registration, our own interior scope. So that gave rise to the great separation of the interior and the exterior, gave rise to the great separation of the physical, material orientation of the scientific inquiry to the spiritual, hence the separation between science and religion and philosophy, rather than recognizing these are 3 disciplines that are a tripod on the basis of which we are seeking to unlock truth, unlock knowledge, unlock wisdom, unlock reality, and that they serve inside a greater whole. So the great separation of these 3 disciplines produced all sorts of pathologies, culminating in what I'm proposing is the reckoning of this time, the reckoning of the decade we're in, and possibly the next several decades, where what we describe as the modern knowledge project indeed made us very knowledgeable, and at the same time brought us to a breaking point. Humanity is now using what it knows and the way it knows what it knows to destroy itself. We are destroying ourselves, we're destroying the environment, we're destroying life. And when people describe the meta-crisis, they will describe a dozen different crisis points, a dozen different wicked problems that are almost impossible to solve, and they will describe that those are connected to each other. I am proposing the radical consideration, which is that knowledge, the way we use knowledge, the way we engage knowledge, the very place and function of knowledge acquisition, knowledge assimilation, knowledge regulation, knowledge verification, in and through the modern project of knowledge acquisition, is the underlying story of all those challenges, because we have so much privileged the material and the outward, the exterior knowledge over the interior. And what we are suggesting, what we're going to be seeking today, is not to get rid or run away from science, because it is such an important platforming to anything we may be able to reach for. But the question we are facing is there a way to reintegrate new, old and new ways of knowing, old and new ways of generating knowledge, verifying and validating knowledge? And if yes, could it be that some of the greatest problems on the world table, the solution or the remedy cannot actually be found inside the problem itself? As Einstein alerted us to, we can't solve those problems with the same mindset that created those problems, but rather through a new kind of integration that we are seeking to invite here. And so that's what I'm framing as the mesoteric entry into this conversation. And what comes alive for you as you just processing this, please?
What it causes in me, because as we've said, I didn't see this beforehand, and the way that you've woven this together and brought it together. It's a simplistic view in myself that it's brought, but it is that science became separated from conscience. So it's very interesting because, as you know, I work a lot with the revelation that lives inside language. And the word science, it's related to the word conscience or conscience. And so much of the problems that we're running into is if something can be done and it is profitable, it will be done. But there isn't then a reckoning, an objective. There isn't any place to look at the overall effect of what will be caused. And that's where science comes into the picture, which would be the integration, as you said at the beginning, of science with philosophy, with religion. Then they're operating together rather than science being seen to be something which is its own branch, and its effectiveness is measured against can we do it, rather than the question, well, what's the effect on the human overall? There's no body to refer to. We haven't reached the level in our human development of having almost a council of planetary morality, not morality as it exists in the world now, but what goes with good stewardship of a planet. And then the scientific endeavor, the conscience measures whether that particular experiment having been done, should the findings be applied, your number 9, in a practical method, or would it be best to put that particular discovery on the shelf? We now have the knowledge, but what it would lead to is a destructive effect. So therefore we don't do it. But we don't have that ability. So science to me lost, to a large extent, has lost its science, lost its conscience. And so that to me comes to mind.
Thank you, David. And you're encouraged as you watch this to also search on portals to find a live event segment where we actually went through the discovery, explored the discovery of a threefold perspective of conscience. And we are already seeding what we will call the Trinitarian view of the universe, even in asserting this idea of C-O-N, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, the 3 building blocks of life. And what you're proposing is that science is a science that is tethered to the building blocks and to the latent purpose of life, such that it is not separated. So the problem indeed is beautifully framed there in that separation, which brings us to this, David, which is the framing we used in the last episode, in episode 21, when we brought again exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric to explore the mystery of conductivity, increasing conductivity, and asserted this idea that is an esoteric idea, that there is an epoch and that an epoch is a developmental evolutionary program, and that when we look through successive epochs of the planet and combine the appreciation of the human development and evolution, there is a new appreciation to unlock about the significance of this moment in time. And so what we suggested in that is, and this is really where you opened, that exoteric is superficially available everywhere. Mesoteric is scientifically, with dedication and love, and through academic research, is generated. And we are proposing that the reversal that we talked about in the two moves, because I'm showing here the two moves. So again, the two moves were that the move from exoteric to mesoteric is a forward move to deepen. The second move from mesoteric to esoteric, so if you journeyed in the exoteric from the outer perimeters into the grounds of the cathedral of the inquiry you are exploring, in the esoteric you actually turn around and you now step back with your back, because you can't come into it head on, because as you said, it's a step into the unknown, and you are stepping into the inner sanctum of that core of that cathedral of knowledge, or cathedral of inquiry that you're exploring. And so the question we are grappling with is that if we're going to have these conversations, we are called to address, well, how is it being solved? How is it being validated? What's a way to appreciate an esoteric inquiry? And how to know what to expect when you embark on this journey, which are all different ways of asking the verification and the validation and the authentication and the justification, different words describing different aspects of the conundrum we are facing. Before I go to name 5 kinds of knowing, was there anything you wanted to, this is where we started in many ways, you already said that, anything about this before we bring some mesoteric ways of knowing and frame again what it is we are looking to do by integrating the esoteric dimension of the inquiry?
An adjacent view, touching on what I said earlier, potentially, is the exoteric is living within the rules of what's already been discovered, and can go to a shallow, these days particularly, can go to the Google fallacy, as spoken about in earlier portals, can go to AI and actually have something robotically recombining existing references to come up with a statement of some kind, but doesn't go into it in greater depth. The mesoteric starts to be trying to, in a way, I want to think for myself, but I'm thinking within existing frameworks and seeking to expand those existing frameworks. And that is, as you said, a deepening beyond that. And something about not that this is a statement about the complete kind of approach to the esoteric, but the esoteric would then be looking at the place of that more advanced knowledge within the purposes of a planet, a universe, and a human in the universe. That's where the conscience would start to come in, because it may be that the mesoteric discovers a interesting story. There was a quest for when mostly the world was running on kerosene, and there was this byproduct which was called petroleum, and no one knew what to do with it. So an offer was made to give a prize for someone who could come up with a use for this useless byproduct. That became way more important than kerosene, because it's gas. It's what we use in our cars. This was the byproduct. So there was an advancement in that mesoteric knowledge. There wasn't then a question about what does that mean for the planet as a whole if we have the burning of petroleum or gas product throughout the planet by 1 billion people. That would be like a universal question that would appear, which doesn't get asked. I'm not saying that defines the esoteric at all, but it's an illustration of kind of the three levels. One level would just drive the car, the exoteric, because it exists. The next level is being able to invent the stuff on which the car runs. But the third level would be questioning, what does it mean if we're starting to poison our air? And that would be the sort of the longer term inquiry, that Iroquois idea, thinking 7 generations ahead. That to me touches on the esoteric. It's not a statement about what it is, but it touches into that third less personal dynamic.
Well, you are asserting that one of the entryways into esoteric inquiry is the question of why and the question of purpose. So that now leads us into the verification, the authentication problem. And I've covered similar space in the Universalis 17, but we want to bring it as a foundation here to show that empirical knowledge gained through observation and experimentation, and rational knowledge, one that's gained through logical reasoning and analysis. And a third form of knowledge, theoretical, academic way of knowledge derived from concepts, models, and abstract thinking, one that synthesizes information. These three became very powerful, very instrumental in recent 4 centuries. And we've made tremendous progress. But as we said on the previous slide, this is part of what made us separate the interior dimensions of knowledge. And even when you bring into it experiential way of knowledge that's grounded in personal experience and acquired through doing and living, and procedural knowing, which is knowledge found in skills and competencies cultivated through practice and developed by carrying out tasks. These are very important dimensions of knowledge. We count on these. What we are proposing is that they are now rendering us insufficient, unprepared to meet the challenges that we are encountering, which is why we are asking and inviting the search for truth and the search for knowledge that's enabled by creational logic. And we will define what we mean by creational logic. One way to ground it is the idea of natural laws that are working throughout the universe and the natural validation of life. So what we are proposing in expanding the frame of knowledge, the ways of knowing, and I'm not showing here other ways of knowing such as relational knowing and intuitive knowing, because they are largely dismissed from the at least traditional dogmatic scientific method. Although there are many frontiers in science where system thinking brought relational ways of knowing and so on. But I'm emphasizing here the need to pivot or transition from the knowledge of things to the knowledge of processes and relationships. And I'm proposing that things and concepts, right, rational knowing and theoretical knowing, very much conceptual knowledge, that things and concepts are forever removed from their originating processes, from their originating relationships. And part of what you demonstrated in just the example you gave about conscience, is that we will inquire about any phenomenology in its multifaceted relationship to how it impacts all the different systems that it touches. So that's why the knowledge that will inquire about the originating processes and originating relationships will integrate dimensions that are left out. And we are essentially inviting an inquiry that will help us transition from seeing a universe as the universe as a predictable machine to a universe as a self-organizing being. It's quite a significant journey, and the entire arc of the current openings conversations in many ways included many facets into this discovery of the universe as a self-organizing being, and us being a conscious participant of this self-organizing universe, and that we bring into it the search for creational logic as the esoteric quest to connect with core processes and relationships. So this is, I initially framed the problem with the scientific limitation we imposed on ourselves, then presented the second problem of integrating esoteric view. This is esoteric perspective. This is placing it in the cosmology of knowledge, the cosmology of the different ways of knowing what comes alive for you on this, before we make the next move to actually present the fivefold validation and verification approach. Please.
First, I can see why you said you've been tackling an 800-pound gorilla, because this is it's large, and what you're framing here is an introduction to a new way of life. I mean, that's why, to me, it's an 800-pound gorilla. This goes beyond the academic. It goes beyond research. It goes beyond information. It's actually speaking about a human integrated with the purposes, consciously integrated with the purposes of the universe, and actually rediscovering what the purpose of human life on a planet actually is, rather than what can we do? Why are we actually here? What do we bring into the universal picture that gives additional meaning and is our human purpose, rather than, oh, look, we can distill petroleum from that byproduct, we can use it in this way. Oh, we can launch a rocket. Oh, we can do this, we can do that. The human facility is to be able to do an incredible range of things, to use that word. But does that mean, does that range, does it get us closer to understanding and being in our purpose in the universe? And when we're closer to that, it would seem that would discount or block certain things that are current human activities. I'll give one obvious example, which I would say is war. Like the idea that one human would actually be deliberately destroying another human, that seems very contrary to universal purpose. But it's in the mesoteric level, there'll be all kinds of academic arguments about why this country is fighting that country, this country is fighting that country. The exoteric might be reading about it or summoned to serve in it. But the esoteric is like, hang on, does war actually fit with what it means to be a universally purposed human? And that calls up a new way of life, because currently it's acceptable. But inside that universally purposed life, it's very questionable.
And once again, we're going to go back and forth, traversing what we call the esoteric transition, the esoteric leap, which we described has a reversal dimension to it. And I'm always, because for me these are not mutually exclusive, I'm holding the scientific perspective, I'm holding the scientific method, I'm holding my admiration and reverence of the mesoteric inquiry and what it enables us, and I'm holding with even greater reverence the capacity to hold that and hold an esoteric perspective where you can say something like this universe is purposeful. But you will lose entry to certain corridors and halls of conversation the moment you say that, because there is more of a seeing of the universe as a random experiment or something that just emerged from the Big Bang without latent purpose in it. So when we say a purposeful universe, when we say life is purposeful, when we say discovering what does it mean to live a purposeful life inside the universe, we already are making an esoteric suggestion, not one that's religiously dogmatic and not one that's spiritually dogmatic, but one that suggests an invitation to integrate a discovery pathway, which is what I'm about to bring with this idea of the validation and the verification problem, where the question I presented to myself last night was, well, so how does life verify and authenticate itself? And I thought, where will we begin this before we make, again, the esoteric leap? Can we traverse the mesoteric to the esoteric to build some lattice work that will help new bridges of connection? And the place I always go when I search for that is I look for nature. I look at the outdoors. And I thought, well, the daffodil authenticates itself with its flower. The daffodil's authentication is its flower. We know when we look at a daffodil that this is a daffodil. It has something distinct about it. And we know when we place a rose next to it that it is authenticated differently because it has a different shape and a different color, and its flower is organized quite differently. And thirdly, we know that the orchid and the many beautiful kinds of orchids authenticates with its unique flower. So I pause here first to ask myself, what is life teaching us about the verification and authentication conundrum? And my first suggestion is each is true to their originating blueprint. And verification and authentication are, in this sense, byproducts of integrity and fidelity of form, enactment, and expression. So I'm seeding building blocks from the mesoteric appreciation of the natural worlds that we will want to take with us as we make the integration move. What comes alive for you when you reflect on this in the context of the tremendous variance that we find in nature, and everything has its authentication tone, its authentication formula?
Yes. Well, I think the first level of authentication is that it exists. So even before being it then represents itself as a daffodil, as a rose, as an orchid, as a human, that it's maintained and supported by the universe. And science tells us that over 90% of the forms of organic life that have been on the planet are actually extinct, which tells us that the validation is there for as long as that particular life form is upheld and maintained. And so that the fact it works within a universe, it exists, says that it's maintained and that it is supported, and therefore it is validated by the universe. So dinosaurs became no longer valid, you could say, or a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or it became no longer valid. So that confirms that idea of the changing of the epochs. To me, a life form is present because there's an electrical signal, there's an energetic signal that supports that life form. So if the signal that supports a daffodil were to stop, then daffodils would stop. The signal that supported dinosaur came to an end, and dinosaurs came to an end. So we are responsive. Organic life is responsive to the needs, I won't say needs, it personalizes it, to the signals that support it. And so there's a maintenance system. So if something is supported, it's actually validated by the universe.
And you just demonstrated again the way you make the mesoteric reversal move into the esoteric perspective. You asked a question, why is this life form present here? And you said there is an electrical signal that keeps it alive, maintains it. And if you make the other half a step within that, you're saying, so there is a form of life and it serves a certain function in the bigger ecosystem of the living organisms, the greater vine of life on planet Earth. And so there is a curious esoteric leap that you make there in how form follows function. And the function is an inquiry about why and what and how it serves life. And that leads us to a similar inquiry. Again, we are building some foundation about the natural verification and authentication modes of life. So we ask, how does the mama bear recognize and authenticate her cubs? And this is where the mesoteric inquiry and research is important, because it affords us information that's very helpful. So we're discovering that there is olfactory dimension. The mother can distinguish her cubs by their unique scent. And there is a vocalization dimension. The cubs produce distinct voice as squealing and squeaking and the various sounds that they produce. And there is a visual dimension. They look very similar, and yet the mother is able to recognize visually the distinction between her cubs. And there is even some mannerism or behavioral way where each cub may have its own unique personality, so to speak, in the way it interacts. And there is a bonding with each of the cubs that the mama bear is present to, such that the motherly instincts are attuned to the cub's needs. And when you trace the great variety of the animal kingdom and its many natures and forms, you find that there are similar authentication pathways with many other forms of life, including with dolphins, where touch is important. So now I ask a question, which is, what is this teaching us? What are these mesoteric insights revealing to us about the verification and authentication systems of life? And it seems to me that one of the conclusions is that authentication is accomplished through integrated multi-pathway recurring input validation. It's not one system. It's not one pathway. There is a whole system of several pathways. I'm showing here 6, there may be more. And that's part of how the life intelligence, the planetary program that we addressed on an earlier episode, is playing out to help the mama bear authenticate her cubs.
Yeah.
What would you say to that? What comes for you by way of reflection on this?
It very much travels within the idea of instinctive. I think of instinctive as a readout from the entire energy system and physical system. So the mama bear is, all of her senses are active. She's not working things out rationally. She's not kind of saying, now I'm trying to measure, does that cub look right? Is this correct? Is that correct? It's not a rational process. It's an instinctive process, which is a complete readout from all the systems at once that has a knowing, that's my cub. There's no question. There's not like a question. There's not a big question mark, appears in a bubble above her head. Like, is that mine? It's like she knows. And to me, that's part of what we call the planetary program in one of our earlier episodes, where it's like, how is it that eels all know to go to the Sargasso Sea by instinct? They all know to be in the same place at the same time at a certain time of year, or in a certain planetary process, and they're not thinking about it, they're not rationalizing it. It's instinctively built in throughout their integrated system. And as humans, we look at that and we kind of marvel. And then we apply our rational brain to try and work out the mesoteric. How do they do this? So we'll employ a university, we'll employ a number of people to research the bear and how does the bear do this and then get our data. But the bear is that very thing. So then it makes me wonder about the human being and the very thing that we are also. But I get that idea of that planetary program is highly intelligent. It's universally intelligent within that particular form, like you said, form there's the electrical content, there's the form and the function, and the mama bear and the picture there, the dolphin, they're entirely within. They're fulfilling their form and their function, and they're wired into their signal. They know what to do instinctively. And it's very, very interesting in that regard. The human has a different job.
In my research on this in the last 2 days, as I was seeking to create the pathway for discovery, I haven't had the time to discover whether there is a computation of numbers. I'm sure that has been tested and is being researched. Would you say the mama bear knew that she had 3 cubs and 1 is missing now because she only has 2, whether there is a computation of number or is it individuated to each and every one? I suspect there is some kind of that capacity as well. So what I'm describing here is by no means a comprehensive, but I am bringing the significance of multi-pathway awareness into this. And I wanted to do one more and ask myself what would be the third entry into this. And I remembered how on several earlier episodes you time and again introduced in current openings this distinction of system 1 and system 2, where we said system 1 of the human is already complete, is already evolved, and system 2 is still evolving. And we time and again reflected how anything in terms of the functionality of system 1 of the human digestive system, respiratory system, and so on and so forth, those have gone through tremendous amount of evolutionary development to perfect what they do. And what we are asking is, what can we learn from that system about how we are evolving the frontier of consciousness, the frontier of knowledge. And so this is my third pathway here. I'm asking, how does the digestive system know what to keep and what to excrete? And the discovery is that the digestive system, as you just said, doesn't make conscious decisions. Doesn't say, okay, let's debate whether this is good food or not. No, it uses, first of all, physical, chemical, biological processes to determine what to absorb and what to eliminate. So once again, it's a multi-faceted, multi-step process. And it begins with physical breakdown through chewing and through the peristalsis movement in the digestive tract to propel the food along. And then it continues with chemical breakdown facilitated by digestive enzymes, by the saliva, the stomach, the pancreas, and the small intestines, breaking down food into proteins, carbohydrates, fat molecules, and all the many small parts. It's a fascinating conundrum to think through the designer perspective. What was the problem? If there was a designer of the digestive system, what was the problem they were trying to solve? And how did they evolve this system through thousands and millions of years? Because it is such a sophisticated, extraordinary system. And what we see is that the surface, which is what I'm showing in the visual, the small intestine surface, is the area that facilitates absorption, where the nutrients from the broken down food are absorbed into the bloodstream and the waste products move into the large intestine, which absorbs water from the waste and forming a solid stool. So again, we've got this extraordinary evolution in the process of life, which is organic life in the form of the animal kingdom and then us humans. And there was a need to create a mechanism for life. There was a need to create a mechanism to, unlike the tree that's connected to its food through its roots, to let those mobile creatures develop capacity to be supported and nourished from the environment. And the digestive system is the solution for that. And I am proposing that the learning for us is the digestive system encompasses a multi-step, multifaceted process that ensures our bodies receive the necessary nutrients while efficiently eliminating waste products. So again, profound mesoteric know-how that contains esoteric secrets, esoteric perspective about how life works.
And in there, you even said how it needed to produce like a working system, and it developed it over time. But the esoteric would then put that question, well, why? And what is the it that needed to do that? Because if it's a random, completely random universe, why does it need to do anything? Why doesn't it just stay in bed? In a way, why does it need to develop life forms? And what's the urge? Never mind the religious terminology, but just what's the urge by which life wants to develop and evolve and move forward? Where does that urge come from? Because it clearly exists, because the evidence of it is right there in that diagram that you show there. So there's an urge underlying all of organic life to in some way be functional and be moving forward and developing. And the urge that may be, never mind religious terminology, but just there can be agreement. Darwin would agree there's an urge by which evolution moves forward. So what is that urge? Where does it come from? And how come it's there? That would then take us into that sort of more esoteric department, but trying to lose the, funny word, nomenclature, they call it, to use the mesoteric term, the terminology of names that can get in the way because people think they know what something is because it has a name. So to get past the names and just use a name like the urge, it exists. It clearly exists. What is it? Where does it come from? And it's turning up very practically in our digestive system. Creation bothers. It's creation like, that'll do. Yeah, it's true that it absorbs coal, but it'll do. We wouldn't be here.
Exactly. So we've gone through these explorations with the daffodil, the rose and the orchid, the mama bears and the mama dolphin, and the digestive system to give us permission to take the mesoteric foundation of how life works, to continue to inquire into what we are about to journey into now. Because what we are really seeking is to widen the horizon and the scope of knowledge, to expand the ways of knowing, to reintegrate ways of knowing that we left behind, and to open new ways of knowing. Because the portal's central inquiry is, where does the future come from? And what we have been unlocking and observing over the last several years is the future arises and emerges in all sorts of ways through all situations, especially when we make a space for new perspective, new knowledge, new possibilities. And what we are proposing is that the reckoning we have entered in terms of the challenges on the global table are going to force us force our way into integrating new ways. We will be led into it, likely more screaming and resisting, but being forced to recognize that we must integrate a broader way of validating truth, validating knowledge. So we are proposing here that the pursuit of truth and knowledge involves the natural validation and verification inherent in life. That's basically the surge here to reintegrate life in its fuller sense to the inquiry of knowledge and truth. And in the bigger scheme of things, it recognizes that it is about bringing together science, spirituality, and philosophy to sustain their distinctions while creating a greater whole that liberates and nurtures the flourishing of life. And what I'm about to bring on the slide are 5 dimensions of the approach to this, some of which has been framed in an adjacent way on Universalis 18. But I have an intuition, even just before I bring these 5, to pause here and see is there anything you want to say to the audacity, chutzpah, or whatever you will. I mean, I'm not pretending that we have the capacity to do it ourselves. I'm simply framing that this is the project of the next 100 years for human life, if we have a future here. And for me, it's I can get emotional about this because I think about my grandchildren, and hopefully they will have children and grandchildren, and what it is that we are living for next generations. And are we going to truly fall to the fantasy and the fallacy that technology will solve all our problems? And will we surrender to the techno-optimist, techno-utopian story that, oh, forget about it, we're going to have general AI soon here, which means we will have an AI that has a human and will exceed human capacity, and that we will plant all sorts of electronics and technology into our brains, and that will solve our problem. That's horrific for me. I'm glad that we have new technologies that are coming to support our challenges. I do believe they will have important contributions to help us solve our challenges. But any story, any utopian story that supplants organic life with silicon-based life is horrific for me, because, and that's something we've touched on in previous conversations, but because we will lose the human line, we will lose the line of humanity, and we will lose. You cannot really fully appreciate why this is horrific through a mesoteric perspective, because the mesoteric eyes will say, well, what's wrong with you? Life developed the daffodil and the rose, and then the bear and the dolphin, and then us humans, and we are called to participate in evolution, and we are going to create a techno-human. Now, this would be a simplified mesoteric perspective, but it is one that's divorced from the deeper purposes of life and the recognition of the human form in the planetary theater. This is where we make these esoteric claims and assertions, is the spiritual life coming into the human form in the planetary theater to catalyze the development of this part of the universe and to facilitate the testimony and the witnessing of the experience through this realm to truly produce this developmental and evolutionary possibilities. So I got carried away there for a minute, but that's how because for me, this is where we've got to if we are to bring the esoteric, if we are that we will bring feelings and sentiments and intuitions and all those dimensions. So please, David.
Yeah. Well, I get the difference between primary and secondary also, which is everything else, the rest of organic life on the planet, we could say is primary, in that it actually operates directly on the energetic signal that drives it. The human, we have an energetic signal that drives us, that's primary, but we have the permission to turn around and make secondary systems. So we can make cars, we can make houses, we can make AI, we can make Google, we can do all these things, but they don't have a direct signal from the universe to empower them. If there isn't a human keeping a data center alive, that data center is going to die, because it's not a primary signal that's coming to it, it's a secondary signal. Permissions come to the human, then the human's like, oh, I can do this, and the human makes something. That's a secondary signal. What we're looking at in the esoteric is a new primary signal. We're looking at the biological human evolving. That is the primary human evolving. And then we can do more or do less, because we may realize, part of what we may want to do is actually reduce the amount of secondary systems we've produced, because we've really gone overboard with how many of them we've made. So, but that would be determined by the human. So we get caught up in these secondary systems, and they're reaching a point. And I find AI very interesting because I see it to be like a creep into the mesoteric. Google, you do a search and you'd be in the exoteric and it would give you information. Now you go in with a question. I had a client of mine who asked AI, is there life on other planets? And it came back with like a 5-page answer. And it quoted the potential number of planets in the universe. And it said, it's absolutely certain that there's life on other planets. So that was, but the way it dressed it and they were drawing all the information, it acted like it was mesoteric. So what I'm seeing is the robotic working of things is now creeping into, and this is what they're worried about, of course, in colleges, universities, is you can get the professor who uses AI to set the questions because it'll be easier, and then the students use AI to answer the questions, so nobody actually does anything at all. So it's creeping into the mesoteric. But artificial intelligence can never become primary. It can never get a new creative signal. It's always operating within the recombining of what's already there, which is potentially fantastically useful. So I'm not running it. I'm just saying that there's what it's capable of, and also now how it's creeping into what was the mesoteric domain, which is to me a very interesting feature. So I get this idea of primary signal and secondary, and the human gives birth to many things that the universe will not directly support. Well, nuclear submarines are not directly supported by the universe. Dolphins are, whales are, but nuclear submarines, you've got to have humans keeping those things going. And just one further point, which is that the antithesis can drive us toward the thesis. That is that what I've seen many times, and this is a known feature, it very often takes pain before a person will change something. Like until there's sufficient pain, the person will keep doing what they're doing. And then there's enough pain, and it's like, how can I change this? So if we look at the human race as an organism, unfortunately, the pain level is increasing, not decreasing, to the point where it's like the antithesis may actually drive us towards what can be done, how can it be done? And the thesis starts to appear in a stronger way because the pain causes us to readdress.
Right. So this is very helpful framing that you offer there, David, the primary signal and the secondary signal. I suspect that if we had these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who are trying to unlock the mysteries of AI, they will, in a quiet room where nobody else is listening, they will reveal to us, they will tell us that they are seeking, they are hoping to induct a primary signal into the technological evolution, and in a way that they're hoping to get to acquire immortality in this way. So we addressed that on other conversations. What I want to do now is lead to where I believe life already is and has already solved the immortality question, which is in its own validation of itself and how it includes and integrates the cycle of life and death. That's partly how life actually solved the immortality problem. And so what I'm about to do, I realized we passed the hour. I'm going to bring the fivefold dimensions of what I'm calling the integrated validation and verification dimensions. Then we're going to pause. We're going to conclude this episode here and move into episode 23, where we will actually bring to life those. And you'll tell us what the significance of the number 3 in this is, because we said we want to transcend catch 2022 and transcend the catch 22, and here we are. So let me bring this. I propose that the first dimension which we will bring to life and instantiate on the next episode is the study of creational logic, where we understand the natural laws that govern how the universe operates. And the key into validation and verification dimension 1 is knowledge, what you know, what you perceive. And then I propose that the test of that initial validation then is in taking what you know and perceive into what you can do, where the inquiry moves into living applications and the experimentation that you can do with the can-do power afforded to you because of what you know and what you've discovered. This is already going to lead us from all forms of perceptive and perceptual knowledge and forms of those kind of knowings into the experimentation and the experiential dimensions of knowing, and to what it is you can do, and where we're going to look at the significance of building mastery in various domains. And that will lead us into the third domain of verification and validation, which is to do with the environments and the systems produced because of the creational logic that you embrace and its application. So this will be an inquiry into the ecology of results you generate. And primarily we will bring to life 1, 2, and 3 in the next episode. And the 2 more to add here is number 4, the relational, the communal, the collective capacities and possibilities and outcomes. In other words, if number 3 was about the environment and the systems that were produced because of 1 and 2, verification 4 appears in the human network that you are building. And for many, and in many ways, number 4 would be number 1. So I'm actually not demonstrating here a linear or chronological, they are co-arising, because the kind of relational, mutual, and collective networks that you are able to build and the capacities and possibilities and outcomes you cultivate there, for many would be the first validation of the kind of knowledge you have. Do you truly have facts that you can quote, or do you live by an integrated, embodied life that cultivates around you the values and the ways of being and doing with others that unlock tremendous possibilities? And yes, number 5, in the sense of the enhancements, the invisible and the visible enhancements and blessings of those realms, the more than human realms, that live inside the human and beyond the human, and the blessings that surround you. So that is what I'm going to be proposing, having traveled through the validation and verification know-how of the daffodil, the rose, and the orchid, the mama bear, the mama dolphin, the digestive system. I inquired in parallel the immune system, how that works, but decided that would be too much to go there. But there's so much to support us. And I'm suggesting, can we humans, as we continue to pioneer the frontiers of knowledge and the frontier of truth, can we realize how powerful the scientific inquiry has been and what the miracles and the blessings it gave us over the last 4 centuries? But do we realize that we have reached a breaking point, that we are literally destroying life, destroying ourselves, destroying the planet, destroying possibly beyond the planet the emergence of life, and that we're not going to be able to solve it merely with technology, but rather that we will need to reintegrate ways of knowing that we left in the past, and we will need to pioneer new ways of knowing. And my humble starter attempt into this is to encourage us to look at these 5. What would you say, David, to bring this episode to conclusion, and then we're going to pick it up right here into the next segment?
It says to me that it needs its own segment. So it's
okay.
It's very wise to. I think in a way the antithesis is then catch-22 is sending us into the antithesis is sending us into 23, which is excellent because a lot of things get stopped at 22. That's why it is catch-22, but to then go into what would be the next cycle. So it's like we're entering a new number. It's 23, but it's a new number 1 at the same time. So I think that is very appropriate. And you are addressing a new way of life. It's incorporated in what exists, but it's reintegrating with the primary, rather than believing the secondary can save us. The secondary is not going to be able to reintegrate us with the primary, is how I'm finding myself framing it today. That we are, in that sense, creation beings. We respond and are maintained by a signal from creation. And secondary technologies are not going to allow us to biologically evolve. They can help us make us more capable within the already existing dynamics that we know, but they're not going to help us actually biologically evolve, which I think is part of that new way of life, part of a new epoch, part of that epoch change. So that AI man is not the ultimate. AI human is not the ultimate. They used to say laptop man is not the ultimate. Now it's AI man is not the ultimate, because we are maintained by a primary signal.
Well,
and it takes that grows in power, and something will shift with us.
Well, so I think we now know that we're going to call this something like the validation and verification and authentication challenge, and that Trinitarian universe is likely to be the framing of and the title of episode 23, where we will go deep into creational logic and explore and build some examples of creational logic, and then lead into some demonstration of also validation pathway 2 and 3. So how about if we pause here mid-flight and pick it up on the other side with episode 23?
I think that's wise. I think grappling with that gorilla in 2 parts is a good idea.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Hey, bye for now. Bye.
along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.